It sets some unhealthy expectations.
It is very dangerous.
In marriage, everything is about communication. You're listening to Let's Get Naughty,
a podcast for real talk and honest conversations about all things relationships and marriage, the good, the bad, and the naughty.
Whether you're already married, almost married, or wanting to get married, we're here to help you build a solid foundation for a love that lasts. Let's get naughty, y'all. Welcome into another episode of Let's Get Naughty.
Welcome back, guys. Today we are taken to the internet. We are taken to the talk.
The TikTok.
The TikTok. We are going to be reacting to TikTok's dating advice.
We sound so old.
We sound so old.
That's going what I was to the TikTok. Like that. That's a sign of being old when you don't say like you're going to Instagram or you're going to TikTok. You're going to the TikTok.
Seriously. Well, that's what I was going to say is in order to film this episode, I had to like purposefully go to TikTok and look for this stuff. And I'm not super familiar with how the app works, but here we are. I think that this is important because TikTok is the app right now. And there is, especially for the generation that's currently dating, a lot of them are apparently getting their dating advice from TikTok.
I think what's interesting is you see just some really obviously bad. Mm-hmm. You see some great advice, and then you see some that like kind of have some good and some bad mixed in together, and and that's where it's really interesting, and I'm excited to really jump into things like that.
Yeah, I should say in my scroll, I'd say like 80% of what I saw was just atrocious to the point where like I didn't even think it was worth really bringing here. So a lot of what we're going to share, we're just essentially going to share some TikToks and react to them and talk through like what our thoughts are on them. In terms of like long sustainable marriages with dating advice. A lot of it was so terrible that it can't even grace this podcast, but we're going to do a few fun ones.
Yeah. And I think that's also important is that we are reacting from a point of dating for marriage.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a lot of different purposes that people have for dating, but if you believe that dating is meant for getting married and having a long, successful marriage, I think that there's some clear guidelines there. And so, yeah, we're excited to kind of jump in and talk about the TikTok.
Let me teach you one of the most powerful techniques in dating. Listen, a lot of the times in dating, you're going to experience people that are hot and cold, right? One week they're texting you like crazy. The next week they're being short with you and they're not giving you so much attention. What's our first emotional response to that? It's call them out, right? Say, hey, listen, I don't understand why you're not hitting me up. Or, hey, listen, I think I need to take a step back from this situation because it's really bothering me. Let me tell you something. The worst thing that you can do is verbally tell someone that their lack of attention is bothering you. Even if it really is deep down, telling them gives them all the power. The reality is, even if you're feeling that way, you need to take actions and stay silent. You can't say shit to them. Just take a step back with actions. Don't say your moves to somebody. Because let's say they're not giving you attention because they're actually busy. Then it shows you're patient, right? And that's better for you. And then let's say they actually don't give a fuck and they're not giving you attention that way. Their true colors are going to come out at some point. So you're better off keeping your mouth shut.
Oh, this is so good.
Okay. We're going to start with a buttload of crap.
Yeah, this one, there's a lot going on here. And I think the first one is just he's playing games, right?
Yep.
You know, and if your relationship is taking strategy in games, that is not a good foundation for a successful marriage because games in marriage do not work.
No, absolutely not. I feel like the way that I knew that our relationship was ready to move towards marriage is when I knew that there were no games being had. Right. And that's to say, like, I feel like we had a level of some games happening when we first were dating, which is when we were not dating well, which again, we still haven't shared our story on the podcast. Yeah, we'll have to do that. We did not date well in the beginning, but I feel like that was truly one of the big markers for me of like, oh, this is really real and sustainable. Like, this is someone I can marry, when I realized there were 0 games going on.
Yeah, and one, you don't want to be someone to play games because you're not marriage material at that point. But then two, if someone that you're dating needs games to be played, and if you need to like be thinking strategically,
Right.
and it kind of leads us into the next point, which is he says don't verbally communicate that.
Yeah, that was like the huge flag for me, was just, he literally said the worst thing you can do is communicate. Like, how is that good dating advice? It's terrible. The answer in your relationship is, in maybe like 0.1% of instances, to communicate less. Like, the answer is never to communicate less, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're casually dating, I could understand that. But if your purpose in dating is to get married, you have to understand that in marriage, everything is about communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone's not communicating well and your reaction is to pull back, like, that is not good.
Yeah. Another theme I saw a lot as I was looking through TikTok's dating advice was this concept of like not appearing needy. And that's
Right.
definitely part of what he's trying to communicate. Like, don't communicate that you desire them, which is like, it's
Play
again,
hard to get.
it's all a game. Yeah, playing hard to get. But yeah, you shouldn't be like desperate, and you should be okay in yourself without the relationship that of the person that you're dating. But I just think that playing hard to get is just that's just terrible. Like, yeah, be good on your own, but like, don't play games. I guess that's really the heart of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's a huge theme across TikTok, is from what we saw,
Yeah.
was that, don't need them,
Right.
or don't let them know that you want them. And I mean, I think from a psychological point, like, there is some truth when we're dating that we like people who don't just like completely fall all over us when we first meet them. And I would like encourage people, like, hey, you can be self-confident and be self-sustained in dating. And I think that's a good thing. Like, we would say, find your fulfillment in Jesus and be self-confident in that. And then like someone will come along and complement that. I do think that is like, there is some underlying truth there.
Yeah.
That I think is very biblical and true, in that if you are looking for someone to come in and complete you, which is I think what we're seeing when we're seeing people are desperate, is they're like, you're the person who's going to come complete me, so come complete me, like, right now, like, I'm desperate for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why at an underlying level we don't find that attractive. We want people who are complete people, right?
We're attracted to people that are like sure in themselves, that don't need us to fill that.
Yeah.
At least if you're a healthy person.
Yeah. And so if you're dating, like, find that confidence and find that completeness. And that's really found in Jesus. And so, I think that's a great, kind of takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah. But needing to play games to not show that you care about the person or desire to be with them, like, just all that is just a bunch of baloney.
Yeah. And I loved another word that he used, because I think it's really interesting in dating. Well, and also just relationships in general, is the idea of power. He mentions you give them all the power.
Yes. And that's what the games are. It's like this power trip, right?
Right. Well, and now this is something that, like, where I don't think people play as many games in marriage. Like, I think it's really hard to play games in marriage. I think there is a lot of power dynamics and grabbing in marriage, and it can be, from financially, it can be just in the relationship, or like what we've seen is sometimes even with just kids, like, the kids can hold the power of, like, the kids like me more, and so I hold more power. But like, that's just another version of games and things like that can be just so destructive to people. is if you guys are doing battle over who holds the power.
Yeah. Well, if you even see a relationship as a power dynamic of who has the power, that's not a relationship. Like that's not what your relationship should be. If you approach your relationship now, it is important to say, like, we talk a lot about marriage, so sometimes I have to kind of like switch my brain back to the dating phase, because there are different healthy boundaries and expectations and things, because when you're dating, you're not married yet. And so sometimes I do have to kind of like make that switch and remind myself. But when you're married, if one of you is seeking power, well, let me say, it is a very natural thing to desire. I mean, scripture says like a woman will desire her husband. That does not mean that she will physically want her husband. It means she wants to be in the position of her husband. Like, we have natural desire in us to compete for control and power. And ultimately, that is just like selfishness and sin in us. If you are approaching your marriage from that point of like who holds the power, I could go on for how detrimental that could be in so many different areas. And so it's different when you're dating versus when you're married. But if you are doing that when you're dating, you're going to bring that into your marriage, and that's not at all healthy in marriage.
Yeah, and as we were talking about this, I think like as we think about power in a relationship, I think it's a little bit of a paradigm shift that we need to have in that it's not the power between who has the power. I think it's the power that God has given married couples, because we think that married couples are powerful together. And so rather than say, do I hold the power or does my wife hold the power? Just be like, wow, look at the power we have together. And I think I really believe
as
that.
a united force.
Yeah, I think that when you combine someone's strengths and weaknesses and another person's strengths and weaknesses, 1 + 1 is now equal to 3. And I think that's God's design of what marriages can do. And so I think like recognizing that the power is in being married and in that. And so don't look at your dating relationship as, do I hold the power or does this person hold the power? But if I married this person, would 1 + 1 = 3?
This is the best dating advice, and it completely worked for me. This is the first of a few, so check out the playlist on my TikTok. So you can do this whether you're currently dating somebody or whether you're not, whether you're single. I want you to go to your notes app, open that up, and make a new note. Label this new note my dream person, dream guy, dream girl, whatever it is. Then you're going to create a checklist. So the little like circles that you can check off, make that. And then you're going to write at least 5 things that you cannot live without in your dream person. After I went through my divorce several years back, I made this exact same note on my iPhone. Except for I had a list of like 20 things. And if you're interested in that note, I can show you in another video. It doesn't really apply to this. But after my divorce, as I started dating again, I would go on dates with people, first date, and I would check my list. After my date, I would come home, I would look at my list, and I would make sure that the person I went on that date with checked off every single thing or the most important things on that list. And if there were things that were on that list that they didn't have, it wasn't going to go any further than that. Because the more and more dates that you go on with somebody that doesn't actually fit everything that you need in a relationship, the harder it gets to break up with them. And so I wanted to make sure I got to the point. This also didn't allow me to settle for anything. And when I went on a date with my now husband, our first date, I remember looking at that checklist. And ladies, he checked off every single thing on that checklist. So I want you to know that there really truly is your dream guy out there. You just have to not settle before you find him. By making this list, you will know exactly who your person is and who isn't your person.
This is a fun one.
Yeah.
What are your immediate reactions to this?
I think that there's some truths and some lies kind of combed in together there. And so I think it's really interesting. Why don't you start with some takeaways?
So I would say I mostly agree with her and what she has to say. The biggest one being like, you should have standards and expectations and non-negotiables for what you're looking for in a person. And you should not waste your time dating someone who does not meet those standards.
Yeah, I feel like that's two things. So starting on the list.
Okay.
I think that there are a few things that are, must and, just things that you can really look out for. I think my question though is I think that there's a few really strong ones, and then there's a lot of things that I think people would say that they need that I would really question if that's should be on your list or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we said previously, I can't remember which episode, but I remember we kind of briefly touched on this idea and we were like, we should do a whole episode about like what's on your list, which we still should do. Because I feel like I have a lot of thoughts about this. And I would love to hear what y'all think and have to say about this. I think it depends what's on your list.
Yeah. So I think the first and obvious thing that should be on your list is going to be, are you in the same place spiritually? Because that is just such a big want and need. Like, so that is just like the foundational question in my head.
Right. No questions asked. That is a requirement. Yeah. Scripture makes it very clear that you should not be unequally yoked. And there's just no question that if you are a believer, you should want a marriage that is built on the firm foundation of your faith, and you should not date someone who does not have that same desire. So that's definitely the first one. I will say we have, I don't know, maybe we should talk about this at some point, like in terms of dating. If you are dating, we do have a resource of 7 questions you should ask to know if you're ready to get married. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of like the 7 big conversations we think that you need to be aligned on in order to get married. So, faith being the first like one, but it's kind of, it's kind of like our version of what we think should be on the checklist. I think I can think of friends who are dating and are seeking partner, and they have things on their list that I think are very unrealistic and just not helpful. I think that they're missing out on amazing men who would make amazing husbands because they're fixated on little things that truly don't matter.
Right.
And so that's where I think that having a list is not helpful if the stuff on your list is not necessary.
Yeah. So, I mean, we gave you one key that should be on your list. There's some important things like, do you want kids? And I mean, we could go into, like conflict resolution, and there's a few things like that, like, is this person my ride or die? I would say there's probably like 4 or 5 that I would say like, hey, these are really good to be on the list. But then I think there's a bunch that are, really things that I think can just trip people up. It kind of gets into the meme of she's a 10, but like she has brown hair or she has blue eye, like whatever it is that like doesn't fit your list. I think that there's a lot of things that people can put on there that should not be on a requirement checklist.
That because they don't contribute to how great they can be as a spouse or the marriage that you can build together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if it contributes to that, like, I think that maybe that means it can and should be on your list. But if it's superfluous stuff that doesn't actually factor into how good of a husband or wife they will be, does it really matter?
Yeah. And so I think that's just would be some of our pushback is, for example, in her TikTok, she said she had a list of 20 things. And I'm going to guess that if we looked at that list, I would disagree with at least 10 of them.
Yeah.
I just have a hard time thinking that
we don't know what's on it, but yeah, we could probably safely assume that there are things on there that we would personally think are unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, even though, like I said, I feel like I mostly do agree with what she had to say, I think that where this could turn into toxic and unhelpful dating advice is just telling women like, hey, like, have this perfect picture of a man, even at the very end, she signed off by saying like, your dream man is out there. You just can't settle until you find him.
Right.
So if this list is manifesting this like perfect image of this perfect fairy tale prince that you have in your head, and that's going to keep you from a man who is great in so many ways, but maybe doesn't check a couple of the things, then that's where it's like really unhelpful. If
Right.
you're letting yourself be like, oh yeah, I deserve the best, I deserve everything I want, so I'm not going to settle until I find my fairy tale prince, that's just unrealistic. But like, don't settle for someone who doesn't meet your requirements. So it's in the middle there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Is at the end of the day, there's a lot of really good men and a lot of really good women, but there is always going to be a flaw in someone.
Exactly.
And so coming in and looking in marriage for a spouse, you have to understand you are marrying someone who's imperfect. And so if you have a list of 20 things, to me, it sounds like you're looking for someone who's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so just what is really important,
Mm-hmm.
and then just understand, is this someone I can grow with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, something I did love from her advice is if that person doesn't check your check marks, what are you doing dating them?
Right. Totally. I completely agree. That's where I think it's helpful, because I do think that if you're looking for a spouse you're dating, like that's the whole point of dating. Like going on a date with someone, checking to see what you can find out about them, and then being like, is this person worth my time to pursue more time with? If you do have a solid idea of healthy non-negotiables and you go on a date with someone who doesn't meet them, run away. Like, don't waste your time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that I think is really common, is this casual dating culture where people are not dating for the intention of marriage.
Yeah. So it's easy for them to make excuses for someone who doesn't have requirements that matter to them. Or okay, a few things. One, you assume that they're going to change and that you can change them, right? If you're like, oh, well, he's perfect in all these ways, except for he doesn't have the same beliefs as me, or he doesn't want kids and I do, but like, I know he loves me, so we're going to figure it out. Like, no, don't. That's terrible advice. Don't waste your time. But the other thing I loved that she said was that I forget what word she used, but like, the longer that you date someone who doesn't meet your requirements, the harder that it is to walk away. And that's so true. Like, that is why dating is so messy and dangerous, is when we waste our time with the wrong people. The deeper that we go, the harder it is to leave and walk away. And that's when you see people settling and like, choosing relationships that aren't good for them. Look, y'all, with divorce rates near 50%, there is no question getting married is one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make.
That is why we created Ready to Not, our premarital course to help you build a solid foundation for a lasting marriage.
You'll take the world's leading relationship assessment, get a personalized report on the strengths and growth areas of your relationship, and watch lessons where we help you understand your results and give you tools and exercises to grow in 9 different areas.
This is designed to give you structure to have the important conversations you need to have and to get clear on your expectations in everything from finances to family, conflict, sex, roles, faith, and so much more.
Research has proven that investing your time in a course like this will increase your marriage success rate by 30%. Don't just prepare for your wedding day. Invest time preparing for the lifelong marriage that will follow it.
And if you're already married, can we just say that this would make an amazing wedding gift? With Ready to Not, we'll help you move into marriage with clarity and confidence.
And a special discount just for Let's Get Naughty listeners, go to knottedmarriage.com/readytonot and use code LGK25 for $25 off. That's knottedmarriage.com/READYTOKNOT and use code LGK25 for $25 off.
Now back to the episode.
This is
is why you're not crazy if you can't get over that one negative thing your partner said. So in relationships, Dr. John Gottman found that it takes about 5 positive interactions to negate one singular negative interaction in a relationship. And he was able to take his research and predict upon 90% accuracy which married couples would be divorced within 9 years. And so if you're in a relationship and you have 5 negative interactions, it's going to take 25 positive interactions to negate those 5.
This was actually news to me. I mean, we know of Dr. Gottman. He's like one of the top experts. I'm not going to say the top because I just don't know enough about the research.
The institution has done a ton of research on marriages.
Yeah.
And so they have from my understanding, the most stats on predictors of divorce and all that stuff. So we know, like we were just reading today about an 87% reliability on his ability to predict divorce based off conflict resolution patterns. And so, but yeah, the 5-to-1 thing is, I feel like something that we've heard. I didn't hear it correlated to that specific stat.
Yeah, I haven't heard the stats behind it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I love this one because it is so true.
So true. Yeah, this is definitely one we would like thumbs up and agree with because it is so true. I mean, everything in life, past your marriage, like one easy example that comes to my mind is when we talk about like social media and comments on social media. And as someone who puts their life on the internet, you hear it said all the time, like the negative comments stick so much harder than the positive ones, right? And so you hear people say this. I mean, even if you're not on the internet and just in general, right? Like 10 people can love you, but if one person doesn't, like that sticks with you. And you think about that, and that comment or that mean thing someone said to you like sticks in your mind. And it's because our minds, we're just wired to focus on the negative because we want to solve like those problems and fix them. And so we do focus on those things. And so apparently the research shows that 5-to-1 that like in order to outweigh that negative comment, you need at least 5 positive ones. And so I think this relates to the way you talk to your spouse, the level of conflict that you have, like a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think it also brings up the thought for me is it's not just how many, like the quantity, but how negative and positive your experiences are. And so something that comes to my mind is like when people are fighting, like what does that look like? What is said? Do people go to hurtful levels? Because you're married to someone who is so close to you that if they say something, it can really hurt. And they also know you enough where they know what is going to hurt you and what's not. And so that's really mindful. If you go to that level and you go deep and you hurt someone, like how many really positive interactions is it going to take to recover from that?
Yeah, it takes a lot. Yeah. Right. So in general, I mean, any like hurts in your marriage, it takes the filling, we can talk about like things that empty your bucket and fill your bucket, right? Like that you hear that deposit and withdrawal, what's the word?
Yeah.
Analogy,
yeah.
Like you have to deposit in order to pull money out. And so anytime you do something that pulls that money out, like you need to have that investment there waiting for you and you need to build it back up. And so I think this is so true. And I think just having that perspective of like trying to deposit into your partner in dating too, like this is not just a marriage thing. Giving more, words are so powerful, man. Like so powerful. And so the way you talk to them and about them, all of those things, but just know that hurtful things that are said, ugly fights that happen, or even if they're not ugly fights, but just like little bickering, like you have to outweigh that with the good, healthy, uplifting stuff, or else your marriage or relationship is going to deplete faster.
Yeah. And I think this is just perspective. It helps you say, hey, like look at how hurtful these negative and how much it takes out of our relationship when we have these negative interactions, right? Whether it's big fights or even just the small ones, right? It's still withdrawal depending on how much. And we need to counter that with, if it's a big fight, we need 5 really big positive like unity moments. And then if it's a small bickering moment, we need to have 5 like quality smaller interactions.
Yeah.
Like that is a lot. And so it teaches you, I think it tells you 2 things is, one, we need to be really careful when we're fighting of how we hurt each other. And then 2, we need to start making deposits like right now. Like,
yeah, you need to, it requires 5 positives to like almost like make up for a hurt, but you need to also start with that by building that up in order for those hurts not to like withdraw. What's the overdrawn?
Yeah.
You get an overdrawn fee if like you haven't already built that up before the hurt happens. So it has to happen on both sides of hurts. And again, we've said this a million times, like you're going to have withdrawals in your marriage. You're going to accident. You're going to mess up. You're going to say hurtful things. You're going to mess up. You're going to have conflict. I think you do have a lot of control over how deep that gets, which I've said this before. Like, I think that's one of the things I'm most like proud of in our relationship. I think we're both so cognizant when just to be really careful to not like cut each other deep, because we know how hurtful it can be and we don't want to let that happen. So, but I think we've seen that with couples who are just like really in a tough rut where they're just constantly withdrawing, and we'll encourage them in like some positive things to do to try to like build up their marriage, and they'll do it once and be like, why is this not better? And it's like, because like you've got a lot of withdrawals. It takes 5 times the amount. Like you can't just say one nice thing to your husband and like it's gonna fix this pattern of hurt that you guys have. So yeah, I like having that perspective that you need 5 times the amount of goodness to outweigh that bad.
Yeah, I feel like that's something you've done a good job of. Like, I think I do it too, but I think you've helped bring that tone into our marriage.
I think
of all of the small things of just being like, thanks for doing the dishes today, or like, thanks for going to work today. I think I've said this before, but like when I come home, like Molly's like genuinely excited and like will come give me a big hug, and like that's a great positive deposit in the bank account. But there are more, like, I feel like we put a lot of small deposits in the bank account on a daily basis, that when we've talked to couples that have, even some of our friends that like might not be doing as well, we've noticed that they don't deposit as much in the bank account.
I'm thinking of a specific example. Friends who are just like kind of in a tough rut of conflict and hurts, and I was talking through with her, like just encouraging her how to work through that, and I was encouraging her to like affirm her husband and find ways to appreciate him and thank him for things. And I forget like exactly how it came up, but I was trying to give examples of what that looks like for us. And I realized, I told her, I honestly think that we say, I love you, I appreciate you, or thank you for something like specific, like literally 50 times a day. Like,
okay, that's dramatic, but it's like,
I don't think it is
5 or 6.
I honestly, no,
it's more than that.
It's way more than that. I'm not kidding. Like and I think you said that I'm good at it and I've brought it to our relationship. I think that that's true. I think that is natural for me, but because I brought it to our relationship and I introduced it, it is now just as natural for you, because like, even though I think just in my nature it's more natural for me, it's now a instinct and a habit for you as well, even though it wouldn't have come as naturally. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally.
So that's probably another tangent. We could talk about all the ways to like work on those little daily small deposits. But I think that's a great point that really does play into this 5-to-1 thing, that like we've communicated that before, that like all of those little small positive things, the ways that we build each other up and appreciate each other and just like deposit into our relationship, it gives us more of a buffer for when those negative things happen. When that one thing does happen or is said, our marriage bank has a healthy buffer in it where it doesn't hurt as bad. The withdrawal isn't as severe.
Here's your reminder that if he wanted to, he would. One time I asked my fiance why his alarm goes off 30 minutes before he actually gets out of the bed, and he told me it's because he wanted more time to cuddle me in bed and spend time talking to me before he actually had to get up and go to work. I was out late last night, so I wasn't home for dinner, and he made dinner for himself and then made sure there was enough left that he could package up and save for me to be able to have lunch today. And I work from home, so I could have made myself lunch, but he wanted to make sure that I was taken care of. We were laying in bed late one night, and I was talking about how we hadn't really had time to go anywhere and just do something outside of the house together, so he got both of us out of the bed, told me to get dressed, and took me on a late night Target trip just to walk around so we could have something to do together. I don't eat most meat, so he makes a vegetarian version of almost anything that he makes for himself so that I could have some too if I want it. He has never let me walk through a parking lot in the rain when he's with me before. He always drops me off at the door and then goes and finds a parking spot on his own. But before we were together, I was in relationships where I was begging someone to give me just a fraction of the love that I was pouring out. And I think a lot of us waste so much time trying to teach someone how to love us and train someone how to be a partner, when there is someone out there who's willing to give it to you without you having to ask for it and without you having to beg to be loved back. And we all deserve more than having to ask to be loved, bestie. That is all I'm saying.
Okay, so this one is an example of a large trend I discovered today. I like how I pulled my glasses up.
Oh, you're figuring things out.
No, it's like I feel like such an old woman being like, today on the TikTok I learned hashtag if he wanted to, he would. And so this is just one example. A lot of the ones that I saw were hard to use for a podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hey, howdy. But I know a lot of people are just listening. And so a lot of them are just like text over videos of boyfriends and husbands doing really sweet things, which wouldn't translate on an audio podcast. So that was an example of, more audioly, like her sharing examples of things that if he wanted to, he would. But this is a big trend. Videos women are taking of their husbands bringing them breakfast in bed and saying if he wanted to, he would, like things like that. So let's talk about this trend. What are your thoughts on if he wanted to, he would?
Well, again, this is one of those things that I think that there's some truth in and some danger in.
Yeah.
And so I think the truth is that men are intentional when they want to be. And I think looking for a man who shows intentionality and choosing to be intentional, whether you're dating as a man or in marriage, like you can choose to be intentional with your wife, and that those are times to do that. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the good of it. I think that there's some bad there because it sets some unhealthy expectations. Wow, is that the best relationship you've ever seen? Because I've never seen a relationship that good. I mean, do you think that there's anything bad in the relationship? And that's my point. Is like that's a Instagram couple right there where you see all of the good, but they are going to have problems just like anyone else.
Sure.
And I think that can set some unrealistic expectations, because if a man is being intentional, but it may look different, I think it's easy to say. Or it goes the same way for the opposite sex,
sure.
Man, she is really intentional with her words. Like Molly's really intentional with her words, but she doesn't cook like my mom, right? Like my mom works like 7 hours on a meal, and like that's what she does.
Yeah.
And
that ain't happening over here, baby.
That's not here. Like Molly's like, if it takes me more than 20 minutes, it's out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so like that's a really good example of if I'm looking for intentionality from my spouse, like, or from someone who I'm dating seriously, like that's really important. But I think being careful with what does that look like, and do I have a standard of what that needs to look like?
Yeah, and so, you know, she listed examples of all these things that I forget, I think she said fiance, I don't know, of
fiance.
what he does for her. Amazing. Like, I'm so glad that he does these things for her. A lot of them you do for me, but some of them you don't. And so
No.
if I'm just like, oh, well, if he wanted to, he would, I guess my husband doesn't love me. Like, that's where it's dangerous, right? Like, you don't open the car door for me every time I get in the car. And so there's examples on the internet of men doing that and women saying if he wanted to, he would. Like, but that doesn't mean at all that you don't love me or care for me or are willing to do intentional things for me. You don't bring me breakfast in bed every day.
No.
I bring you coffee in bed every day. So you're a lucky man.
Okay, you bring me coffee a lot in bed.
But I just think that's where maybe that line is. So a couple of things I wanted to say. I agree with what you said. The other thing that I think is important here is I think the part of the underlying thing that's not fully being said but is being said, if he wanted to, he would, is I should not have to communicate what I want or need, because if he wanted to do these things for me, he would. Because we've heard it said the same way of like, if he loves me, he would know. Have you heard that one?
Oh, I mean,
have I been guilty of that one?
I feel like that's like you're saying that is her. That is you. Well, it has been you.
Yes, it has been me for sure. But that's what I'm saying. Like, women are told that, and we think that, like, oh, well, if he loved me, he would do this, and he would know. Like, he would know. If he loved me enough, he would be able to read my mind and know what I want and know what I think is romantic and what would make me feel loved. I think what she said at the end of like, hey, I was in a relationship where I was begging for someone to love me half as much as I did, and that's not healthy. You don't deserve that. Absolutely not. You do not deserve to beg to be loved. Like, no. But it is not a bad thing, or it is not a sign that he loves you any less than he should if you have to communicate what you want and think is romantic, or what would make you feel loved, or how you would like to see him be intentional in the ways that he loves you. And that is where I think that can be dangerous, is when we've got women over here thinking like, oh, well, if he wanted to open the door for me, he would. So I guess since I haven't communicated to him that it would make me feel really loved if he opened the car door for me every time I got in, and he's not doing it, he doesn't love me, and he's not willing to do it, and he's just a chump.
Yeah. I think one of the things you see is that you try and love your spouse the way that you feel loved.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is just screaming in my head.
Oh, no.
And so we got married, and Molly's love language was words of affirmation, quality time, and physical touch. And then we got married, and she basically just flushed all of those, and it just became acts of service, like complete opposite. And it's because she realized that she likes a clean house and things like that. And so I quickly learned that cleaning the house equals love to Molly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I don't do everything, but I take a couple of things, and like I am the dish cleaner, and I am the bathroom cleaner, the floor cleaner, and like the kitchen wiper downer. So
you are.
And so I just own those things,
Yeah.
and that blesses Molly. And then when, you know, like whether it's like celebrating your birthday, things like that, like those need to be communicated.
Yeah.
And I've learned to love you better and to know how to be intentional in a way that blesses you because you've communicated that to me.
Right. If I just sat back and had this full like mindset that, well, if he loved me, he would know and he would do it. I just think that that's so dangerous to communicate to young women who are looking for husbands, that like, oh, he should know, he'll do it. You won't even have to ask for it, because that's stupid, because men are kind of dumb sometimes. We as women think a lot in our heads, and so we assume that men are doing the same, and I have learned through marriage that that's not the case. And if I don't tell you what I'm thinking, you are not a mind reader, and it is very dangerous for me to assume that you can read my mind. That never ever goes well.
No.
And basically, if like we in a previous episode gave the example of me crying 2 years in a row on my birthday because you didn't do what I wanted you to. Go back and listen to that if you haven't.
I literally asked, and you're like, no, I don't really want anything for my birthday.
Is that what I looked like when I said it?
Yeah, that's what you sounded like too.
That's exactly what I sound like. But that's an example of like, it is not helpful for me to assume that you know what I want, and it doesn't mean that you don't love me if I have to communicate what I want. Like you do love me. You did want to celebrate my birthday. You did want to make me feel special. But just because you didn't know how to do it doesn't mean that you didn't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Like, you felt sick last night, and you were like, I was like, I don't know what you need. Like, I don't know what's going on over there. So you had to say, like, hey, like, would you do this and this and this? And I love to do it. I was like,
Yeah,
great. And
right.
it blessed you. But I was like, I don't know how to take care of you right now.
Right. And so I think, I don't know. I just want to make sure we're speaking to that. That's where I think it could be dangerous, is knowing it's not a sign that your relationship isn't as good, or your boyfriend loves you any less if you have to communicate what you need. Now, if you communicate what you need or desire and he makes no effort to do it, that's probably a bad sign. But I guess I just don't want to not address the fact that I don't want girls over there thinking that they shouldn't have to say anything and they're just going to know, because that's very dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there's some smart men out there, but I think it's a pretty safe bet just to assume we're all really dumb.
You're just not as observant. Like,
We're not observant.
I am hyper aware of like anything and everything at all moments,
so
and
true.
you're just like completely oblivious.
I feel like guys in general are pretty oblivious, and I'm like at a whole next level.
Yeah, they could do studies on your brain.
Yeah, I can like just
one
turn
of my
it off.
favorite things, honestly. You're so like in your head all the time in a way of not the complete opposite of what I was just saying, where like I'm like thinking about our arguments when I say I'm in my head, but you're just like in your own world thinking about this problem that you're solving in your brain. If I like talk to you, a lot of times it takes you a minute for your brain to like catch up on what I said. So sometimes what I used to do is I would like say something, like say we're driving in the car to church, and you're driving, I'm in the passenger seat, and we're not really talking, and I say something because something comes to my brain and you don't respond. I used to just like ask another question, like follow up, like continue to talk at you until you picked up on what I was saying. What I've learned to do is just ask the question and wait and see how long it takes you to acknowledge that I asked a question and respond. And I swear to God, I feel like I can see the gears in your brain going, rewind, like play and like replaying what I said about 45 seconds ago, and then you respond.
All right. Well, this is like a whole nother conversation. A whole nother conversation. Because
we can save it for later then.
My wife talks a little bit. And sometimes I'm not a necessary component of this conversation. I'm just like there so my wife can talk out loud. Like,
all right, we're addressing that at another time then.
We'll jump into this another time. But it is on because we're having this conversation later.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can talk about how I talk at you instead of to you frequently another time. And who I learned that from.
But the whole rewind. Hey, you know the things when you can say something that like can cut and hurt someone? Right there. Insert who she learned it from.
Yeah, we'll get to that at another episode. But yeah, anyways, where did I even come from that? Just the concept of like the fact that you can't read my mind, and it is not a bad thing for me to be able to communicate. And last night I love that you brought that up. That's a perfect example. I had a migraine last night. I felt like I was going to vomit and pull my brains out all at the same time. It's like excruciating pain. It is really hard for me to know what's going to bring me relief, and two, be able to communicate when I need something. But I used to be terrible at communicating. And I used to, like, when I felt sick like that, for example, I used to be really annoyed when you weren't being like loving and accommodating and knowing what to do. But now I've learned, like, of course he doesn't know what to do. I have to be able to tell him. So last night I literally said, can you go get me a bag of ice for me to put on my head? And can you make me a snack to eat? Because I knew that's what I needed. And you were so more than willing to go run and do that and like do that for me. But I had to be able to ask for it.
Yeah, I mean.
And how much better did that go than in the past when, like, one, those needs weren't being met, and so I was just sitting there in pain. But then two, like, I'm annoyed with you because I feel like you're not, like, accommodating the fact that I need you, but you don't know what to do. It's just like messy.
Like, as a very unaware, dumb, I don't want to put this on men, but just like being dumb cashier over here in this situation, like I'm just not aware of these situations, right? And so after you have Advil, it's like, well, what else do you do? You know, like, So
I had to communicate to you, and then when I did, you were more than willing to.
Yeah,
you just didn't know if I hadn't told you, and so I don't know. I think some of these examples of the if he wanted to, he would are like valid, and you know, like especially in terms of dating, I do think that it's almost better to err on that side of like, it's because I feel like a lot of times it's like the cute text messages, right? And it's like, if he wanted to call you, he would. Like,
right.
I think that's true, right? Like, if you're not hearing from the dude, he's probably not that into you. So you know what I mean? I think in the dating scene that can be helpful, but
yep.
Hopefully we addressed where we feel like the messiness is in that conversation.
Yeah. So let us know what your thoughts are on some of these TikToks and what our perspectives are on them. And if there's any other things you want us to respond to or react to, send it our way, and we'd love to take a look.
Yeah. You guys probably have better example videos you can send us. I found more, but they were terrible. So if you want us to respond to other ones.
Yeah. And you guys might use TikTok and not have to go to the TikTok like a bunch of old 80-year-olds over here.
No, that's what I'm saying. We do have an episode queued up to react to dating advice, like not necessarily TikToks, but just general advice that people have been given. So we've already gotten some responses on Instagram, but if you want to contribute to that, make sure you head to Knotted Marriage on Instagram and send us your best or worst dating advice, and we will be doing an episode on that soon.
Thank you guys. We will see you next week.
See y'all later.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us for another episode of Let's Get Naughty.
Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you want more encouragement, join us on Instagram and YouTube at Knotted Marriage to check out all the other resources we have to help you build a tighter marriage. If this conversation encouraged you in any way, please consider leaving us a review on whatever platform you're listening and posting a screenshot on social media. That support means more than you know and really helps us reach more couples.
We'll see you for next week's episode. Go get naughty.